Hello and welcome to Murder Dictionary Podcast. My name is Brianna and that's Courtney.
Hello.
Oh, you did your classic hello.
How
it's a
are
classic
you?
court hello.
It is. It's the old standby.
Courtney, do you know where everyone can find us? Can you inform us where we are on social media?
We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We are at Murder Dictionary Podcast on most every social media platform. And we have an email, a Gmail. So you can find us pretty much anywhere.
I feel like if Movie Phone was a girl, that would be that. What just happened?
This is my customer service voice. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely come talk to us, join our groups.
We have tons of memes, news, anything that seems interesting that's like breaking news in the true crime world. But we're really good for memes and funny stuff.
Yeah, that is our wheelhouse.
It is. We're silly.
Yeah, so if you find any, if you want to post them, definitely we encourage everyone to post in our groups too. Not just us. We're not the only ones. Y'all are funny too.
This is a group party.
In our description and show notes, you will find links to our Patreon. So if you want to join our Patreon, you can get access to perks and rewards and bonus episodes. And today we're going to be recording another bonus. So if you're listening to this right now, we've definitely got a new Patreon bonus up on our Patreon. So once you're finished listening to this, definitely go check that out. So if you want to join, it's patreon.com/Murder Dictionary Podcast. And we've got a few new patrons on there to thank this week. We wanted to say thank you to Haley, Stephanie, Steve, and Beth.
Thank you.
So thanks, you guys. We appreciate you. And with all that business aside, we can get to our very last jailhouse murder for letter J.
Good.
I know.
I'm
It's
exhausted.
time. It's time.
By the time we get to the end of whatever letter, I'm just like, thank God.
Yeah,
like,
once
it's been such
it's the
a
last
journey.
episode, you're like spent. Especially since we did have a couple really heavy ones, a two-parter, very dense. So today we're going to break that up with one that's just kind of a wild and I want to say wacky. Would that be insensitive just to call it a wacky story?
I think it's pretty wacky. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not the best, but it applies. It completely applies here.
Yeah. So we've got our very last letter J jailhouse murder with Robert Michael Wilson, a.k.a. Pete.
Pete, all I can think of is Boston, the 60s, late 50s, right? There's a lot of Robert Michael Wilsons.
Yes.
Just doing the research, it was a mountain.
So maybe it's just kind of like Pete's a real wild name. I could just go by Pete because there's not any other Petes that he knew.
I think a lot of criminals have a lot of, hey, that guy, Pete,
Okay.
right? It could be that too. Just that simple.
But I always trip out. I've talked about it before. Like, I don't understand when people have one name like, hey, my name's Brianna, but you can call me Sue. You know?
It's like,
How often do we see that happen? It's weird.
so for example, Margaret, the nickname is Peg.
No.
Yeah, you didn't know
Who
this?
would do this?
So Peg Bundy, her name is Margaret Bundy. It's a family name.
That makes
That's the
no
best show ever.
sense.
But Peg, that's the shorthand for Margaret is Peg.
What I thought for this was like that he was reinventing himself. Like every time he does something wrong, goes into a new gang, a new crowd, he's come up with a new name. So it's like my birth name's Robert. Then I go by my middle name once I burn the spot with this group. And then I move on to Pete once this gang doesn't like me, you know?
I like that theory also, but
But I don't necessarily know if it's true.
why not Bob?
Right?
We're
Just
reaching
change it to Bert.
We're reaching out to Pete.
Bobby.
You could be Bob. Like you are Robert. You are Bob. But
It just seems like a much simpler transition that makes sense.
when he's a lot younger, you see people referring to him as Pete.
Got it.
But
Okay.
I
Family
mean,
name.
He's here and there. Pete, Bob, Michael Wilson.
So good old Pete was born in Massachusetts in 1940. He was always in trouble as a child, and he actually dropped out of school in the 8th grade. super young. But I feel like that was a little bit more common back in the day. I think that would be completely crazy today. But it seemed like a lot of people dropped out young.
I also know this is what I picture is like Newsies.
Right. Like he's got to do some work.
Like New England, like New York City, Boston, right? Like it all blends together and they have page boy hats on.
Right.
But he's probably like, he's got like 8 jobs. He's probably a shoe shine boy.
Right. That's what I assumed happened, to be honest.
When
you said Newsies, I was like, yeah, that's honestly what I pictured. Was just like, yeah, I've got 5 different jobs. Got the newspapers in the morning. I shine shoes at night. And then I, whatever, I work at a bakery overnight or some shit.
He's working with Christian Bale. Exactly. We were there.
So I think that, even though it says he dropped out in the 8th grade, my assumption would be that he was trying to help support his family, that maybe they were, struggling a lot financially and the kids had to help out. I don't necessarily know if it's a reflection of his intelligence or just that it's more a reflection of poverty and social standing and, economics.
Seemed more like that.
Right. So he had a long history of violence that started in his teens. At 16, he killed a man by running him over with his truck, which is considered his very first real serious crime.
That is in quotes because that's exactly how they describe it. Was like a blurb on a newspaper. Oh yeah, 16. I can't tell you. I cracked open everything this time. And I mean, it was amazing. It's real serious crime. He murdered a guy at 16 by running over his truck. Like just a total afterthought.
Yeah.
It's a sign of the times.
It seems exactly
old-timey.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's just so brutal, but to them it seems so normal with like, oh, well, he's done all this other whatever, thievery and bar fights or whatever happened. But his first, quote, real serious crime is when he murdered someone.
Right. With
like you
vehicle.
have to go to that extreme to actually seem like you're having a serious crime issue.
Makes me think all these newsies have records. That,
right.
Like every single, he's got 2 bodies on his, what?
Starting at 9, just collecting those teardrop tattoos.
And I'm sure at this point, he's now like a criminal in the streets. He's 16 years old, killing somebody with a truck. He's running scams. He's driving trucks for probably gangsters.
Yes.
That's how this goes.
Absolutely. So he was considered an associate of the Winter Hill Gang, a mostly Irish-Italian mob syndicate that ran out of Boston, Massachusetts. So a brief refresher on the Winter Hill Gang is that they were run by Whitey Bulger in the 70s and into the 80s until a 1998 racketeering case revealed that he had become an informant. So Whitey fled to Boston in 1994 and relocated to Santa Monica, California. And many, many years went by until the FBI finally caught up with him and put him under surveillance. Then in 2011, he was finally arrested at the age of 81. So most of you guys, that's just a brief little synopsis. A lot of people that are listening have already heard that story. You guys already know. But if you haven't, that's what happened with Whitey Bulger, the leader of the Winter Hill Gang that Robert was a part of.
I remember waking up that day they got him and just being like, this is news. It was on TV. It was like breaking news that morning. And his girlfriend brought him down. He was running for a long time. Whitey was doing good. Sorry.
Yeah, it's crazy that he was on the run for that long.
That's a story. If you're into true crime, if you're into the mob, listeners, look into the Whitey Bulger story.
Yes.
And especially if you know nothing about this. This is an exciting story for you.
If you're not familiar, then definitely. So Robert began working his way up the ranks through Whitey Bulger's Winter Hill Gang. And in the late 60s, he was able to take on some bigger jobs. He was kind of small, low-level, late 60s. And then by the 70s, they had built up a little trust in him to take on some bigger ones.
I would hope so.
Well, yeah, you put 10 years in. But I mean, that's kind of typical of the mob. You don't want to trust anybody, so it's going to take a minute to kind of get in everybody's good graces so they know you're not a rat and all that other shit. Although there aren't many details, we know that 30-year-old Robert committed a jewel heist in September of 1970. Robert and 3 accomplices transported $30,000 in stolen diamond and emerald jewelry across state lines from Baltimore, Maryland to Providence, Rhode Island. And this would be about 200 grand worth of jewelry today.
This is another one that this is my personal opinion, connection with the mob enabled this to be wiped away. There is nothing. There's no conviction. I mean, this one he was able to do and get away with.
Right. There's not much information about it because there was no record in the courts about it. Nobody was convicted. No charges were brought up. It just kind of seems like through word of mouth, everyone knows that certain people were involved in this jewel heist. So we know that it happened, but we don't have any details about it because there was nothing on record.
This was another one that was like a bottom corner of a newspaper. And I think it was probably right when they got arrested for it. You're like, hey, this happened, but nothing stuck.
Right.
So sometimes you read newspapers and you'll be like, you're charged for $1 billion jewel heist, right? But they're not convicted, or they're convicted of a bracelet, right? So this one, it seems like it's going to be the mob connection is going to enable him at this point because there's a lot of corruption to kind of get away with this.
Right. They were able to buy someone off or, silence the whole story. And then nothing ever stuck to them. The charges were dropped. But we do know what happened.
Yes, we do.
He was a part of it.
He was.
On March 17th, 1971, Robert's friend, 23-year-old Richard Devlin, shot his roommate, 34-year-old James Rooney Jr., through the heart as he was walking into their apartment.
I find it very interesting also, by the way, side note, that this happens on St. Patrick's Day, which is like shut down the city holiday in Boston. I mean, I don't even know why, but there's something to that part of this to me. Maybe he was like already drunk.
That's what I was thinking.
I swear to God, I think he's just been partying. Just they started the night before and they're just going into it.
That was one of my first thoughts, was just maybe this was alcohol related. One person said something to another person, things escalated. And because we're talking about, mobsters, everyone's armed. So he pulls out a gun.
Like there's circumstances for sure. There's like, okay, shot him. But there's totally something to this being St. Patrick's Day. And yes. I feel the same way. I just wanted to feel that out. If anyone, I just feel like y'all might agree. Like there's something to it. St. Patrick's Day in Boston. Or 1970 something. Come on, stop it.
No, everybody was completely wasted, I'm positive.
Me too.
Which is why I just think this was a nothing sort of argument, disagreement that escalated.
With your roommate too? Like, wait a second.
It could have been a case because the roommate was coming home. James was just arriving.
Yes.
So it could have been something where he got super drunk. Richard was just going on through the night, drinking, getting more upset about something stupid. Like, hey, my yogurt had my name on it and you ate it. And then by the time that James walks through the doors, he's homicidal about the yogurt, It
was Activia.
So that's like the only thing I could think of is alcohol. One definitely played a role in this, but there's kind of 2 options. It was either an argument or some sort of resentment that just grew because of alcohol. Right?
I agree completely. And these are already people that just, they have very serious stakes here.
Yes. Another roommate, David Egan, had seen the men together and he'd witnessed Richard standing over James with a gun in his hand. David saw James on the floor underneath him, groaning in pain. Then Richard snapped at David and just told him to get out. So we have a witness to this that's stumbling onto the scene, but he's told to go away. Robert was then called up, and he was tasked with disposing of James Rooney's body.
This is the shittiest job of the whole thing, too.
Right. But it is one of those things that's very much your way to work up in the ranks of the Winter Hill Gang. You're not going to be the one pulling the trigger. You're going to be the one doing the messy work.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Since this is his task, Robert shows up, he collects the body, and he goes out to start finding a place to dispose of it. While he was digging a hole to bury the body in, the owner of the property spotted him, so he was forced to abandon this half-dug grave that he was working on. So he fled the scene before the property owner could catch him, and he moved on to another place where he started to dig another hole, which was by Patton's Cove off of Dorchester Bay, just outside of Boston. But the problem was the hole he was digging kept filling with water. So then he had to scrap that idea too. Eventually, he decided to just throw the body into the marshy areas of Patton's Cove. Without covering with dirt, no digging whatsoever, just throw it into the water. Shallow water, I'm assuming.
This is like Benny Hill. This is like, I can hear the as he's digging holes.
Yep.
Like, what is going on here? Just comedy of errors.
Yeah, this one's not working. Okay, I've got to go to another one. Now the second spot to dig is not working. Now I'm just going to throw it in the water.
I just realized why he has not moved up quickly.
Yeah, because he's an idiot.
I swear to God, it's taken. Just right
you
now.
You didn't realize that?
Nope, just right now. I'm like, he is terrible at this.
Yeah.
I would not entrust him to do this either. And then it's like, I guess we'll give him this one to do. And what does he do? Wow.
Yeah, that's the thing is like you were right when you said, 10 years is a long time to be moving your way up in the ranks. You would assume that someone could get in with the mob and earn their trust quicker. But if you're stupid and this is the way that you're handling your jobs, if you can't do things right, if you're doing things in a way that doesn't really hide evidence, if you get
fired.
Caught all the time, they got caught on the jewel heist. Like, it's not worth, it's not worth having someone on your team that's always going to be like causing you legal trouble and needing to be bailed out of some sort of catastrophe. So, why would you have them on your team? You give them the like easiest, most shitty jobs ever.
Yeah.
So he just threw him in this just marshy area. It wasn't like deep water or anything. It was just part of the cove that had water and mud, and he just hoped that nobody would find it, which is the worst way to dispose of anything, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah. And in a testimony to nicknames being pervasive through the Winter Hill game, I have to read you this quote that according to Robert, Jackie Rooney was a fucking rat. He deserved to have his head chopped off. They'll never find him. And if they do ever find him, they won't even recognize him. Which isn't true.
Right.
So James's nickname was Jackie.
After the murder, the Winter Hill game became worried that the witness, like we talked about earlier, David Egan, might talk. Because he had stumbled into the scene. He had seen the two of them there together. It was a high probability, right?
Yeah.
So Robert enlisted the help of two friends to go intimidate David into keeping silent. They showed up at David's job, disguised as house painters, and reminded him that he had better stay silent about what he had seen. Robert told David that if he ever talked about the Rooney matter, he or someone else from the gang would come find him wherever he fled and kill him. He made it seem like no matter how far you go, no matter what you do, we will find you and we will kill you.
Yeah. And I mean, he seems believable according to all things so far.
Yeah. So that was the end of the St. Patrick's Day murder for the time being. On May 26, 1971, 2 months after James' murder, Maryland police received a tip from an informant that an out-of-state burglar was coming to rob the Ben Ray farm, which belonged to a high-powered Baltimore attorney. When they got the tip, they stationed police around the compound and inside the farmhouse where Robert and his accomplice, James Nevins, were breaking in. When Officer Pete Edge surprised them and told Robert that he was under arrest, Robert shot at him, but he missed. He fled the scene and attempted to reach the getaway car while officers Fred Settle and Paul Gallan chased him. Robert was eventually captured at a restaurant where the getaway car was waiting for them. He almost made it. As he was just about to get to the car, Officer Settle took aim and shot Robert in the stomach. After the incident, Officer Pete Edge claimed that he wore the .32 caliber bullet that Robert shot at him around his neck for many years.
Now, this is a great little anecdote because depending on who you talk to, different people are wearing the bullet. But most of these people, Officer Pete Edge, like really had a hard on for it and wore this bullet around his neck.
That's so weird.
I mean,
it was just an attempted shot.
Yeah.
He didn't even get hit with it.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not trying to call him a baby, but I mean, I feel like he's trying to be a little bit dramatic, right?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm like breathing about is that.
So Robert was charged with attempted murder of a police officer, but the case was stalled for 7 years. How crazy is that?
It's just another opportunity for this guy. Again,
yeah, he's just out on the street able to do whatever he wants for those 7 years.
Wacky stuff, like wild things and just skating, like getting arrested, getting in trouble, but ultimately like just walking out, just knowing that like they can't stick to it.
While he was awaiting trial, Robert was given a bail amount and he was able to post it. So he went back out on the streets of New England to do whatever he wanted.
Wacky stuff.
Wacky stuff. In June of 1971, 3 months after James Rooney's murder, a body was found floating in the waters of Patton's Cove off Dorchester Bay in Boston. The body was missing its head, hands, genitals, right leg, and had a hatchet stuck deep into its chest. An autopsy determined that the cause of death was a gunshot wound, but they were unable to identify who it was.
Just like he said.
Yep. The coroner ordered an x-ray and the victim's tattoos were cataloged in hopes that, of course, it would help with more information to identify him. And eventually they were able to determine that the body was that of James Rooney Jr., who hadn't been seen since St. Patrick's Day 3 months prior.
It's crazy that all this time that James is missing, he's going out and he's doing these he's robbing farms and just like doing crazy things, knowing that there is a body floating in the water, like waiting to be found. He just assumed that was going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other evidence otherwise because every time he's gotten into trouble, he's able to get out of it. Whoever his bosses are able to get the charges dropped. So I'm sure at this point he thinks he's out on bail. This charge isn't going to stick. He'll just be able to keep going about business as usual.
I mean, at this point, he probably thinks that James is actually sleeping with the fishes. Right? Ha, ha, ha. I mean...
But he didn't even know well enough how to make that happen, just leaving him in the marshland.
It's like the first thing I think of is like, oh, well, you know, Scott Peterson, right? But like this hasn't happened yet. So the common sense of it all isn't there yet, I guess. It's old-timey.
Old-timey. That's always the excuse.
That's the excuse.
So after an investigation, Robert was actually charged as an accessory in the murder. Robert's ex-girlfriend and baby's mother, 21-year-old Toni Clements, was called as a surprise witness in the trial. Toni had been living with Robert at the time of the St. Patrick's Day murder, and they were living on Savin Hill Avenue across from Patton's Cove where the body was found.
What?
He lived right next to the place that he put the body.
Yeah.
That's completely such a great representation of how stupid he was. like we were talking about. Like, he clearly was the worst in the entire gang. And they gave him these shitty jobs and he still fucked them up.
I wonder if he thought like he could almost have the control. It's like, serial killers later, they go back to the crime scene and all this, right? He can look out and see the bay that the guy's in. I live right here. I can see it from my house. Maybe it was something like that. Oh, if they find anybody, I'll be able to control the situation. Something weird other than, I live here. It's convenient, because that just seems dumb. But
yeah, I think that if it were any other circumstance, I would totally agree with that, because most other killers that are killing for fun, for sport, they want to revisit. They want to kind of keep an eye. They want to have close proximity. That's definitely very normal for serial killers. And, what would be the word? Just like people that kill for enjoyment. And I don't think that he's that person. I think that he was just that dumb,
No, I think it was totally convenient because he had already tried to dig 2 holes. It's very physically exhausting. He was probably just like
on his way
done.
home.
I'm at it up to here with this body. You know what I mean? And yeah, he just pitched him out the back on the way home.
It sounds like it. Like,
totally
he just kind of
does.
gave up,
Yep.
So his ex-girlfriend, Tony, testified that Robert had told her everything during their numerous visits and phone calls while he was in the Billerica House of Correction.
I think Billerica Correctional, I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong. I know you all will. Is in Silence of the Lambs. I think it's referenced in Silence of the Lambs.
I'm not sure. I don't remember. I'll have to look it up. Apparently, she had been visiting 4 to 5 times per week for at least 6 months, and he was quite chatty about his crimes.
Yeah, he told her everything.
Right. Which made it just so easy for her to take all that info straight to the witness stand. He also divulged that he thought he was being haunted by James' ghost ever since the murder. Crazy.
That's a great little side to the story is he completely thought he was being haunted by James. And I think throwing him in the bay right outside his house had something to do with that.
Yeah, they can't help. But I would venture to just call that guilt, Robert. That's just feeling guilty.
Maybe you were feeling what you're supposed to feel for the first time.
Right. So Robert was convicted and sentenced to 6.5 years for being an accessory after the fact to a first-degree murder. Richard was convicted of manslaughter in the death of James Rooney and sentenced to 19 to 20 years at Walpole Correctional Institution. He served his time with one of the most famous inmates at the facility at the time, Albert DeSalvo, who was better known as the Boston Strangler.
I don't know if that's
he needs
like applies.
like a theme song, but that
yeah, I know. I'm like, it's kind of near Halloween. Can I get away with it? Ooh, spooky. But he's just a killer. He's just a fucking murderer.
Yeah, he's just one of those assholes that murders people.
Yep.
So if you're unfamiliar with the Boston Strangler, he was a married Army vet with children who worked as a handyman in the 60s while hiding this murderous secret life. He terrorized the city between 1962 to 1964, attacking, raping, and strangling 13 women between the ages of 19 and 35. He was charged with sexually assaulting 4 Cambridge women in 1966. But during the investigation, he just flat out confessed to murdering 11 more women. Albert was eventually brought to trial on 14 charges of assault, burglary, and robbery, including the Cambridge attacks, and given a life sentence. But he wasn't charged with anything related to the 13 murders throughout Boston.
Interesting technicality in this case.
And you see that all the time, especially just the higher the body count, the less charges they end up being convicted of, I feel like. They just want to make sure that they have one, that they've got enough evidence to make it stick and ensure 100% chance of conviction. So once they have that and they know that he'll be serving life, then it is what it is.
Great example of this is Atlanta child murders with Wayne Williams.
Right.
And even to a degree is Stephen Avery, because most people believe like he might not have killed Teresa, but he's where he deserves to be. He belongs there anyway, right?
That's like the belief for the naysayers.
Exactly. You know,
Yeah.
like these are the arguments. And I love a good argument.
While serving time, Albert escaped with 2 other inmates, but decided to call his lawyer and negotiate to turn himself in after only 36 hours. He later explained that he had only escaped to try to make his psychiatric state seem much worse than it was.
It's not the worst way to do it. But then you don't confess and tell them what your plan was. But, you know,
Right.
technicality.
After this escape, he was moved to the maximum security Walpole State Prison in Massachusetts, where Robert Wilson was. In early November 1973, Robert found a loaded gun that had gone missing at the prison 3 months earlier. Because he'd found a gun that had been misplaced due to negligence of the prison staff, officials agreed to negotiate the possibility of early parole, although he'd only served 21 months of his 6-year sentence.
This also was kind of discussed as it's very convenient that you found this.
Right. So is that, in your mind, something that happened on purpose? Like they left it for him? Like it was part of the plan that the mob boss could arrange something with a CO and say, well, if you leave this gun out and then my guy finds it, then we can negotiate this in the courts. Do you think that they had something to do with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, he's still facing federal charges in Maryland for attempted murder of a police officer and other charges related to this Ben Ray Farm robbery. He's going to have to go back there and face that. But if he finds this gun that, gosh, the warden, the prison, nobody can find this gun. And then he finds it, like, hooray to me, you know, yeah, I did this, you know, help me out. Whether it's going to be true or not, he, I believe, thought that it would work out. Regardless of what happened, I think that was his motivation, for sure. I think he found who had the gun and was like, hey, give me this gun. You know, I need this more than you. Something like this.
Right.
Jailhouse negotiations.
Or they arranged it from outside, I feel like.
One or the other.
Yeah.
Totally.
On November 25th, 1973, only a few weeks after Robert found the gun, Albert DeSalvo was found face down on a bed in the infirmary after being stabbed over 70 times. A murder weapon was not recovered, but an autopsy determined that the wounds were from a small surgical instrument. The only suspected motive was that DeSalvo had been selling meth for a lot cheaper than other dealers, so it's possible that his competitors needed to get rid of him in order to get their customers back.
Open air drug market in the prison. And
Right.
don't mess with it. Don't mess with it. It doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah, for some reason, that was just the only thing that they could think of. And it makes a whole lot of sense. You know, if everybody else is losing their customers and losing their money, it puts a big target on his back. Albert had recently been warned to stop, but he did not listen. So they came after him. The death was especially suspicious since Albert had been in protective custody at the time. So it seems like the prison staff may have either been part of a setup or had just simply agreed to turn a blind eye during the attack. They had to have prior knowledge for the attack to happen while he was in protective custody.
Yeah, definitely. And some of this is, you know, there's a hierarchy in the prison system, right? And the people that are very violent, you kind of have to keep them chill, right? But then there's also like a lot of these correction officers are getting drugs from the prisoners. Like, it's all corruption everywhere you look. So, I mean, it's in everyone's best interest to keep the drug dealers happy. Albert DeSalvo brings in this disruption and is like really going to cause trouble. And I mean, it could be as simple as a CO, you know, just looking the other way and allowing it to happen. You understand. I feel like we don't even need to discuss. It's just so clear. We're in true crime. You're listening to this. Like, we know what happens.
Within a few days, the prison's investigation concluded that there were no actual suspects. The only thing they had were leads for possible conspirators that they thought might be involved. Although this too is possibly just evidence of the staff's involvement in the murder, because it's easy for them to say that they don't have an actual suspect. It's easy for them to say, well, we follow up on a couple leads, blah, 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 but it didn't go anywhere.
Very easy.
Because it's, you know, if they're on the payroll, that's what they would do.
Of course.
Ultimately, Robert and two other inmates, Richard Devlin and Carmine Gagliardi, were charged with conspiracy in Albert DeSalvo's murder. In October 1974, the trial ended in a mistrial with a hung jury.
He's always in cahoots with that Richard Devlin, getting wrapped up in Richard's murders, you know? And it's just interesting every time Devlin, this name comes up again and again with him. And it's like the case that, you know, when your mom tells you got to hang out with a good crowd, like this is exactly what she's talking about. There are Richard Devlins everywhere to your Robert Michael Pete Wilson.
Yeah, Richard Devlin was the kid that was just like, you can only spend an hour at his house and I want you home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we know what happens when you're with Richard.
You know what his older brother's like. You know what happened to him.
Right.
You can't hang out with that family.
Absolutely. In January 1975, Carmine Gagliardi's body was found in his cell after an apparent overdose that was later determined to be a homicide.
Yeah, it was heroin. It was a heroin overdose. And you don't hear about homicidal heroin overdoses a lot. It's pretty interesting.
So it must have been something pretty extreme, right?
Oh, somebody
That's
killed him.
The only thing that I could think of is that there's like 5 different people with needles that injected him or something.
Yeah, or they just held him down. Physically
gave him a
held him
hot
down
shot.
and somebody hot-shotted him is what I assume happened. But either way, he went to sleep.
Right. It's not common that you see something like that.
No, I just kept noting that again and again, like homicidal heroin overdose. Interesting.
In March 1975, the jury in the second trial for just Robert and Richard deadlocked and ended in a mistrial again. There simply wasn't enough evidence secured by the prison staff to ensure that Robert, Richard, and Carmine were convicted. So, Albert DeSalvo's murder is still technically considered unsolved, although it's assumed that they committed the murder. After the mistrial, the charges were completely dropped.
They had done this before. The two of them had experience in murder and dealing with the cause, the effects, everything that goes with it. They just couldn't stick it to them. And especially never finding the actual surgical instrument, you know? I mean, not that it probably wouldn't have even helped, right? But there's just so many open-ended questions. But this is a person who, you know, people that are innocent aren't charged with different murders again and again of different people. You know, like once it happens, you know, 2-3 times, and you're also convicted of being an accessory to disposing of a body, like we don't have a lot of questions anymore, is kind of the way I feel about it. But I also understand that, you know, we can't just say, you know, oh, he looks like he did this or something. You know what I mean?
I don't really take it lightly, of course, that saying that a certain person did it that wasn't actually convicted. So we can start with that. But the thing is, we know how the corrections officers, the system was directly influenced by the money that the mob was paying them. And this seems to be very clearly an instance where all the COs were bought off, where all the charges were dropped, which wouldn't normally happen. I mean, everything points to police corruption, jailhouse correction officer corruption, just letting them get away with murder, you know? And they were the only suspects ever brought up. There was no other evidence that pointed in any other direction. But the people that were processing the crime scene, of course, seemed to be paid off to not really gather a lot of evidence, to not really do a thorough investigation. Because of all those things, it seems very safe to say that these three men committed that murder. It's just that the corruption allowed them to get away with it.
Very well said. You took all that nonsense I spew and you make sense of things. It's just, we love you for it.
It's just so sad that in this era that was happening so often, that people were just getting away with things because the cops, the district attorneys, the judges were all on the payroll. And this is just one more of those instances. So they got away with it. They got away with murder.
They did. Dun, dun, dun.
So because the charges weren't added on to him, he didn't have an additional conviction, he was paroled. But he still had those other pending charges. He was extradited back to Maryland, where he was set to stand trial for the 1971 Ben Ray farm burglary and that attempted murder of a police officer. Eventually, yet again, he was acquitted on all charges and released from prison.
This guy.
And that's one more reason why I say he had to be the person to kill Albert DeSalvo. Because every single charge that was put on him was able to be dropped, paid off, gotten rid of, and disappeared. So Albert DeSalvo is just one of the many things that he got away with.
Just the fact that he is paroled is like one of the craziest parts to me of this whole thing. He's given parole. But I mean, what else? They have to. Like, what can they do? They didn't find him guilty,
right?
You know, of killing him. So it's so bizarre.
Once he was out, Robert began cooperating with the FBI.
Yeah, I bet.
Right? He's
Right?
like, I have learned that I'm terrible at this.
I am so bad at this.
There's nothing I can get away with. Like, I keep getting caught, you know? And I'm sure he's thinking, okay, I've gotten away with all this stuff that I haven't been able to, like, be held accountable for. But at some point, something is going to catch up with me. And I'm just going to go away for life.
He gets caught, but he never suffers large consequences. Like, when you're in the mob to this point, 3 to 4 years is a vacation. You know, like, you're just going away for a while.
Right.
You go into camp. You're not serving time for 10 years at a time, right? So it's like you just got to wait it out. And those 3 years eventually just become a couple months, right? So it's like he just does these little stints and gets out. And so to him, it's like, yeah, there's no consequences. There's no nothing. Even getting caught isn't really hard because he just goes and sees his friends for a couple months.
Yeah.
He just hangs out and does drugs and just kills people with no abandon.
There's nothing to be afraid of, you know?
And he's committing huge crimes, heists and planning and murders and, you know, wild shit. It was part of why I was like, we got to talk about this.
Yeah.
Talk about through the cracks.
Definitely. Robert explained that he started cooperating with the FBI because he was so worried about the effect of narcotics on the youth of America, but also because he didn't want to embarrass his family by going back to jail again. And really, you know, you had said basically this is just the easiest way for him to do illegal things and find a safe way to do it.
Absolutely. He's protected. Now he can just do dirt under the eye of the FBI. I mean, and you just can't stop doing illegal stuff. Like, maybe you can just stop doing illegal stuff. No? Oh, okay. Like, that's never an option, by the way, in this whole thing.
Yeah, for him, it's not even a question. I'm always going to continue to live this lifestyle. But if I'm on the FBI payroll, then that means that I can keep doing it and still be safe. They can't really arrest me for anything. And that's crazy. That's the loophole he's finding. So we know that in reality, even though he was working with the FBI, he was still up to no good. But by being an informant, it just ensured that he wouldn't be able to go back to prison, right? So as long as he could live with being a snitch, then he could stay out of trouble.
It's a lot to live with.
He attempted to keep up appearances of having this straight life by opening a restaurant in Baltimore in 1976. On November 3rd, 1976, Robert was driving in Delaware with his friend Paul Harding Jr., who he had met at Walpole Prison when they did time together. Paul had escaped from Walpole Correctional Institute a month earlier, where he was serving an armed robbery sentence. Robert was speeding down the Interstate 95 and going at least 100 miles per hour when he slammed into a concrete barrier by a toll booth at the Delaware-Maryland border. The car flew into the air while Paul was ejected from the vehicle and flew through the car's windshield. His body crashed through the glass windows of the toll booth, then landed lifeless inside the booth. Robert sustained a broken shoulder, cuts and bruises, but he survived.
Again, like, surprise, this guy just 9 lives it.
He is part cat. I can't believe that he keeps going through these things and coming out the other side.
His passenger went through the windshield, went through a toll booth, and like landed in the toll booth. I mean, it's just that, the visual from that accident. Jesus.
That's horrific.
Yeah,
that is terrible.
That's a crazy scene to come upon.
And he just walks away with just cuts and bruises. It's incredible. He was taken to the hospital afterwards and kept under guard. When police searched the vehicle, they found multiple pistols, sawed-off shotguns, a silencer, fake IDs, bulletproof vest, police radios, and ski masks.
Again, this is an FBI informant. Like, he just has no regard for like what he's up to. What are you doing?
Like, who would do that? I mean, how stupid do you have to be? You narrowly avoided all of these convictions. You narrowly avoided serving life in prison. Now you've got a second, third, fourth, fifth chance to just at least pretend that you have a straight life.
And you've got a prison escapee as your passenger. Like, that side note, we just glossed over that. Paul escaped from prison and you're just driving 100. You're going 100 down the road too. Like, no concept of lay low, go the speed limit.
Yep. No take it easy, no fly under the radar.
Hindsight's 2020, I guess.
But he's just an idiot.
Yeah.
I can't believe that he keeps doing this stuff. And I don't know why I can't believe it, because he keeps doing it. Like, why should it be surprising?
Again and again.
So, of course, after this, they caught him and he was charged with 23 different charges related to the car ride, the accident, Paul's death. And all of this happened while he was still in the hospital bed. While he was in the hospital, the accident made news because of his assumed connection to the Boston Strangler murder, which was shocking to so many of the people that now knew Robert as just this local businessman, just this regular straight guy, your neighbor, the guy you eat at his restaurant. Everybody was shocked in his town. While he was recovering from the accident in the hospital, the landlord of his restaurant changed the locks and told the media that he didn't want anyone, quote, with that reputation in the building.
It is not working out.
Yeah. So
being a Boston Strangler murderer.
His brief attempt at a straight life has definitely out the window at this point. In December of 1976, a month after the accident, Robert posted the $34,000 required for his $330,000 bail.
They just keep giving him bail.
So he just keeps getting out and doing dirt.
It's just...
What do they expect is going to happen?
he looks at his bail payment as like, this is my fee that I'm going to pay up front for the next crime.
Right. Exactly.
That's what this bail
I'm
payment
going to earn this
is.
back next week.
Yeah, hold this for me. You know what? Let me prepay you for my restitution the next time I steal.
Hold this for me.
Hold on to that for me. Put this in a box somewhere. Bury it in the yard, whatever. Put it with grandma's trust. I don't give a shit. Just hold on to it for me. I'll be back for it. You know I will be.
While out on bail, Robert was approached by an associate who had 15 valuable paintings to sell, which had been stolen from a Long Island teacher. So since, of course, he was worried about selling stolen art, he did a little recon and asked an undercover FBI agent if the paintings were on the FBI's stolen property list. He's trying to be responsible. Vaguely. Like he's just putting a little bit of effort in to be like, these aren't on the list, right?
No, he's already just like, if they aren't stolen, I can just keep doing what the fuck I've been doing.
Right. His FBI contact said that they were not on the list, so he proceeded to try and find a buyer. Robert purchased a gun to bring when he made the sale in case the buyer tried to rip him off. They met at Treasure Island in St. Petersburg, Florida, for what would later be referred to as the Treasure Island transaction.
This was like made for a Florida socialite headline magazine, like page 6 for the St. Petersburg, Florida Times, the socialites, right?
Yes.
Like, I swear to God, the Treasure Island transaction, kept reading about that, just like laughing to myself.
Robert proceeded to sell the stolen paintings, but he did not know that the buyer was actually an undercover FBI agent. Like, he called attention to himself by asking if they're on the list. What was he thinking?
He's so bad at this.
He's so
I don't know what to tell you.
If anyone was this bad at their job, they would have been fired years ago. Can you imagine? Like being this shitty, like if you just walked into Starbucks every day and the same person just served you like just nothing but coffee grounds in a cup. And 10 years later, you're like, oh, you're still here. Like nobody's able to be that shitty at their job.
Oh, we work with people that we're all every day getting coffee grounds. Just like, what is this shit you're serving? What are you doing? Everybody knows this person.
There's a difference between mediocre and shitty.
Okay.
We all know people like you. All of us work with someone where you're just like, dude, that is just mediocre work. That's fucked up. Makes it harder for everybody. However, this dude is never not gotten caught. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
how could you be that horrifically bad? He's just a fuck up of the worst kind. He's the Three Stooges of murderers.
It's like he thinks it's like, you know, when you're in sports, when you're young, sometimes they'll tell you like, okay, that kid has natural ability. And then there's kids that they can practice and get better. Some kids are just good at stuff. Sometimes you got to practice to get better. And sometimes you practice and it turns out this ain't your thing. Right?
Right.
He should have figured out that football and ping pong are totally different. And he can play ping pong, but he can't play football so well. So
Dude.
Focus on the ping pong. Right?
And that should have been at job one. You know what I mean? Like
Somebody
jewelry heist
something.
number one, they should have been like, look, you can go collect money from our gambling rings, but you can't do anything else.
Who agrees to go on these capers with him? Who is like, are you kidding me?
He's the worst.
Who's the Natasha to this Boris? Like,
right.
What's going on here? Like, who would agree to this? Oh, Jesus.
Oh, Lord. So, of course, because it was sold to an undercover, Robert and his 2 accomplices were arrested in March of 1977. And not surprisingly, one of his accomplices was Robert's longtime friend and co-conspirator, Richard Devlin, who was the one who had shot James Rooney all those years back in 1971.
And he was tried with him on who killed Albert DeSalvo. I mean,
every crime, 50% of his crimes are with this Devlin guy.
Yeah.
Richard claimed that he was just on his way to Florida with his friends.
Those aren't my pants.
That's such a great excuse.
Oh, it's so good.
I'm going to tell people I'm on my way to Florida. Next time I get pulled over, I'm be like, look, guys, officer, I'm just on my way to Florida.
They'll understand completely. They'll be like, please continue down there. We don't want your problems here. They'll be like, we can get you a car. We'll give you
what do
shuttle.
you need?
What do you
Let's
need?
get you to Florida. It's clearly important because you're going there quickly.
I got to say, though, you know what? I have noticed the last couple of years, Wisconsin is really like, hold my beer. And I have family out there, and I've been asking them, like, what the fuck is going on? And like different counties on different sides of the state, Wisconsin is like really vying for northern Florida. I'm serious. I'm not even kidding about this.
I got to look into that.
You got to, but definitely tell the police you're on your way to Florida the next time you get pulled over.
The third accessory, William Englehart, said he was just a messenger. I don't know what that means. I mean, come on.
Neither did he.
You're there for the sake. Like, just take your lick. Just be like, yeah, I did it. You know? When the trial got underway, it was guarded with marshals stationed at the door and hallways because all three defendants had long criminal records and violent reputations.
I mean, yeah, if you put each one of these like next to each other on a piece of paper, you know, and look at each one of their charges and then their convictions and their charges, these are violent offenders that are serial, habitual criminal offenders.
Yeah, we need extra security.
Yeah.
Robert's attorney claimed that the FBI agents had been using Robert as an informant, and when they had no use for him anymore, they basically double-crossed him by setting him up for these stolen paintings, which is crazy.
It's a pretty good story. Honestly, I'm like, hey, they weaved a good web here. I mean, you got to give a little credit where credit is due. And telling stories is an art.
The prosecution argued that Robert took advantage of his CI status to help him facilitate an art heist under their noses. The detectives testified about the weapons and other items that were in the car when they were arrested, and the items were not, quote, the tools a person carries when he thinks he's selling paintings that he has every right to sell.
Love that quote. Oh, that was so well put.
Yeah, that's a little bit too much. That arsenal is a little bit too much for a regular painting selling.
You know what he did? He packed for a month for a week trip.
Right? Is that it?
He did a little extra packing.
He pulled a Darcy.
Oh my God.
He's like, you're going there for a week. Why do you need 7 full, like, huge cases and 3 carry-ons?
And then you take a whore bath in the bathroom for 45 minutes while you know you have to meet someone. There's a driver waiting. You've already got there late. If you don't know what we're talking about, you know. You have to know. 90 Day Fiancé. Catch up, everybody.
Robert Wilson was convicted on May 26, 1977 of concealing, possessing, and selling stolen paintings and possessing a firearm during the commission of a felony. Richard Devlin and Robert Englehart were acquitted of all charges, but remained in custody with other charges pending in upcoming weeks.
Can I tell you what Robert said when it was read? So he looks at his friend and just goes, "That's the way it goes."
Right?
And shrugs his shoulders. Well, that's the way it goes. And that is everything you need to know about Robert. That's his mentality of his criminal life. He doesn't take it seriously. That's the way it goes.
That's crazy.
I'm sorry.
He faced up to 70 years in prison, but on September 6, 1977, he was ultimately only sentenced to 15 years and sent to the Augusta Correctional Center in Augusta, Virginia.
Much like any good band, they gotta do what? They gotta go back and be hometown heroes, right? So we're gonna make our big return to New England.
Robert served 8 years of his 15-year sentence and was returned to Maryland in May of 1990. In Maryland, he began serving the 85-year sentence that he received for the 1971 Maryland shootout, with police and a burglary in another county. When Robert was finally sent to prison for the police shootout, the officer he shot, Pete Edge, said that the thing about Robert Wilson is that he, quote, is like a cat. He doesn't die.
Do you think he was wearing the bullet around his neck when he said it?
Right?
I do.
It's with him forever.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
That's the story of Robert Pete Wilson.
Now, the thing that was hilarious to me is when you're researching this, his name is just so common that you can't even, the obituaries, it was days of just, this is not the one, this is not the one, this is not the one. And then just, you find a lot about California Governor Pete Wilson, Flip Wilson. It goes all over the place. So yeah, he's like a cat. And as far as I'm concerned, this man is eternal. He's alive still.
Right.
Like he's in good health all the
He's
time.
going to survive the apocalypse. Him and Sharon cockroaches.
Yeah. I mean, he'd be like 79 years old.
Yeah, it was a really difficult one to research because once you made a first pass at it, then I came and I was like, well, let's look for this, that, and the other thing.
What Courtney,
which is what we always do.
Totally.
Like I'll send you a script and then you'll be like, oh, let me look into this. Let me see if there's, more information on this aspect. And when I did that, I was like, how did Courtney even put together the script that she did? Because there is so little information. It's so hard to find. So the fact that we could even come up with a story is insane to me because there was just nothing out there.
I was super motivated because for me, when you think Jailhouse Murders, it's the guy that killed Jeffrey Dahmer. You never know their names,
Right.
The guy that killed Jeffrey Dahmer, Jailhouse riots, and then, well, the guy that killed Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler. But nobody knows anything about these people. So that's intriguing, but there's a reason no one knows. And good God, that was a rough one. But
yeah,
newspapers.com. I'm telling you, that's where it's at.
Yeah, you had a lot of luck with that because I was not having any luck following up. So that's the story, what we could cobble together of Robert Michael Pete Wilson, our very last jailhouse murder for letter J.
Good.
Whew, we're on to letter K next week. Yep.
Sure. Yeah.
In the meantime, we've got a new Patreon coming out. So if you are not on our Patreon, definitely check out patreon.com/Murder Dictionary Podcast because we are going to have a doozy of an episode.
Doozy is like barely does it justice.
So if you are following some of the news articles, our bonus is going to cover all the details of this new, how would you describe it?
A family who already has experience with adoption and is very well versed in, how this works, adopt a 6-year-old Ukrainian girl and bring her into their home only to find out that she is possibly in her 20s and a sociopath who is masquerading as a child from the Ukraine. And there's possible adoption fraud and she's just a straight killer, I think. But you know how I feel about things.
So we're going to definitely jump into that. And we have a lot of information. Just looking over, I was like, this is a long episode. So we're going to talk about that on Patreon. If you want to know the details, we have got them for you. So check out our new Patreon episode. If you're not a patron already, definitely sign up patreon.com/Murder Dictionary Podcast. And on that note, we've got a few new people. So we just always want to say thank you. We appreciate everyone who is a supporter. We always appreciate any support that you give to the show. So thank you to Haley, Stephanie, Steve, and Beth for being on our Patreon this week.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And if you want to support in another way, if you are enjoying the show and if you want to support, then it would be awesome if you could rate, review, and subscribe. Those always help us. And if you know another person like we all do that is into true crime, your buddy at work that you always talk about cases with, your, sister-in-law that you were always talking about breaking news with, definitely let them know about Murder Dictionary Podcast. That always helps us out. So we appreciate you guys for spreading the word, for being on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, for joining our Patreon. We really, really appreciate you guys. thank you so much for listening and supporting the show. Do you have anything to add?
I'm just so thankful for everybody.
Sometimes I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, not at all. I'm just
But I know that I'm speaking for Courtney, who feels the exact same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same exact way. Like, this is such a labor of love. And, we do this and we hope we're, making other people as happy as we are making it. So I hope it comes across.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's all. So, yeah, we will be back next week, starting out letter K.
Yep.
And in the meantime, definitely check out that new episode on Patreon, and we will see you next time.
See ya.
Bye. We all have songs that remind us of our first love and bands that make us think of a certain friend. Maybe you have a workout playlist or a favorite album to listen to on road trips. But do you ever wonder what was going on in the lives of the artist when they wrote the music that you connect to your own memories? Rockumentary Podcast fills in the blanks on what you may not know about the iconic artists making the music that's so meaningful to our own lives. Each episode is an in-depth biography spanning from a musician's childhood through all the challenges of their journey to success and how they handled finally achieving fame. On Rockumentary, you'll hear about Kurt Cobain becoming a janitor at the same high school that he dropped out of, or how Jimi Hendrix was kidnapped and held for ransom for 2 days. Our episodes include details about Notorious B.I.G. marrying Faith Evans after knowing her for only a week, and Phil Spector pulling a gun on the Ramones when they tried to end a long recording session. You may know the music, but on Rockumentary, you'll hear the stories behind the songs. Search for Rockumentary on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you like to listen to podcasts.